Now we're going to talk about creating citations. Again, our guide is the publication manual of the American Psychological Association. And you can see there that Chapter 6 is the chapter that talks about crediting sources. When you need to credit your sources, how to quote sources. It'll talk about when you're paraphrasing or summarizing or quoting. No matter which of those methods you use, you need to document your sources. You need to cite your sources. The citations are the short entry in the body of the paper that point the reader towards the end of the paper. Again, citations are the things that go in the body. The references go at the end of the paper. The key to citations for APA is author date. Remember, author date, author date, author date. Sometimes you don't have an author and you have to go with the title or something like that. But author date. Let's look at some examples. I'm going to read to you as if we're reading from a paper. So, contextual contrast is well explained by Harrison, 1995, who demonstrates that range frequency. So here, Harrison is the author, 1995 is the date. In this example, the name Harrison is worked into it's part of the narrative. It's not in with the parentheses. Here we have two authors, Lennon and McCartney. 1966 suggests that. We've got a little quote there. And APA says when you've got a quote, you've got to put the page number or the paragraph or indicate exactly where you got that information from. In the third example, they're using two sources for that information. So they make some assertions that they're writing, and then that citation actually contains information about two sources, Pepper et al. That means Pepper and others, 1967, and Starr, 1971. Things to watch out for when you're doing citations. If you're working names into the narrative and you've got two names, spell out the word and, A-N-D, like that first example, Lennon and McCartney. In the second example, everything is going inside the parentheses. In that case, you use the ampersand. If you have several authors, in this case, Lennon, McCartney, Starr, and Harrison, put commas in between them and use the ampersand before the last one. If you have 6 or more authors, you're not going to list them all. You're just going to list the first one, Lennon, and then put the abbreviation et al. For and others. Make sure and put the period after the al part, because that's an abbreviation part. Let's look at some examples in context from real journal articles. In the first one, the whole citation is in parentheses, author, date. The second one has two authors, Sheff and Golson, using the ampersand because we're in parentheses. We've got the date. We've got a page number because we've got a direct quotation. In the final example on this screen, 3 authors, author, comma, ampersand, the third author, and the date. Here we've got a few more examples. That first citation uses 2 sources, Penbaker and King, 1999, and Penbaker and Stone, 2003. So this one citation is talking about 2 different information sources. Everett, that's the author's name in the narrative, 1999, that's the publication date. We've got a quote there, and so we've got to put the page number. You see the next example, several information sources are being presented within one citation. The one after that, we didn't have an author, so the title of the article went in quotation marks. So we didn't have the author, so we had to go with the title or the beginning of the title of the article. And a couple of examples right at the bottom. And again, this is an image right out of a real journal article. So you can see Mullen ampersand Copper, because the author's names are in parentheses. And in the very next line, Scott and Bruce, the word and is spelled out because the names are used as part of the narrative. Let's look at a few variations of how citations go. In the first one, it's the same author, Smith, but two information sources are being used from two different dates. In the second example, it's one citation. We've got two pieces of information, two articles, two books, two whatever they are. The first one was written by Kidd and Winter in 1948. The second one by Fork and Spoon, I made that up if you can't tell, 2002. In the next example, we've got a corporate author, Justice Department, 1987, and we're listing a page number, so it's probably a citation for a direct quotation. Next example is one of those where we didn't state the author, so use the beginning part of the title of, in this case, an article. The title, and then 2008 is the publication date. This next example, Finch's Diary, as cited in Woolworth, 2011. This is what APA calls a secondary source, and they warn about using it. They say to use it sparingly. If you don't have the original information in your hand, check with your instructor as to whether it's okay to use a secondary source. You should really only use a secondary source if you can't get your hands on the information, you can't borrow it, it's out of print, or the original isn't in English. But check with your instructor. Don't ever pretend you had something that you didn't really have. If you need to do that secondary source citation, the APA manual will show you how to do that. The next two, the same authors, but the first one is in parentheses. We mess up and how, that's a joke. And we're using the ampersand in that one. The one right after that presents the same authors, we mess up and how, but it's in the narrative style. So in that case, you spell out the word and, A-N-D. And the last example of a citation, we had a whole bunch of authors, and so what the APA manual says to do is list the first one, and then use that abbreviation et al., and I've highlighted it in blue to emphasize that the al is an abbreviation, so make sure and use the period after the al.